The starlight nexus floated like a jewel against the velvet darkness of space. This massive station served as a meeting point for hundreds of different species from across the galaxy. Its metal corridors gleamed under artificial lights, while its observation decks offered breathtaking views of 3 neighboring solar systems. Today, the entire station buzzed with nervous energy because the most powerful being in known space was coming to visit. Nisha Patel adjusted her server uniform for the 10th time that morning. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the exotic flowers on table 12. The Crystal Gardens restaurant where she worked was known throughout the galaxy for its exquisite dining experience. The transparent ceiling showed the stars above, while the floor was made of polished moonstone that seemed to glow with inner light. She was 23 years old and had left her home planet 6 months ago. Earth felt like a distant memory now. Her family lived in a small colony where they cultivated rare medicinal plants. Her younger sister Priya needed expensive treatments for a genetic condition. That was why Nisha had taken this job despite being terrified of leaving everything familiar behind. Every credit she earned went straight to her family's medical fund. The restaurant manager, a 4-armed Zentarian named Vex, called out instructions in his gravelly voice. All stations prepare for imperial arrival. Remember the protocols we studied. No direct eye contact with Emperor Dracon unless he addresses you first. No sudden movements near the prince. Stay alert at all times. Nisha had memorized every rule, but her stomach still twisted with anxiety. She glanced at her coworkers. There was Finn, a young man from the outer colonies with bright red hair and freckles. He worked in the kitchen but often came out to help serve during busy times. There was also Quellara, a gentle being who resembled a walking crystal formation. Her crystalline body refracted light into rainbow patterns across the walls. A deep horn resonated through the station. The imperial vessel had arrived. Nisha pressed her face against the transparent ceiling and gasped. The ship was beyond magnificent. It stretched nearly a mile long and was crafted to resemble an enormous dragon in flight. Black scales covered its hull while golden accents traced intricate patterns along its wings and spine. Smaller escort ships surrounded it like a school of fish protecting their leader. "The ship is beautiful," Finn whispered beside her. He had appeared without her noticing. "But I heard the Emperor is ruthless. They say he once turned an entire rebel fleet into ash with a single breath." Nisha shivered but could not look away from the impressive vessel. Stories about Emperor Dracon had reached every corner of civilized space. He ruled the Pyrian Empire, which controlled 3 star systems and countless worlds. His people were the Draken, a species of intelligent dragons who could survive in the vacuum of space, and whose fire burned hot enough to melt starship hulls. Station Director Hammond's voice echoed through the communication system. "All personnel stand ready. His Imperial Majesty Emperor Dracon and the royal household are now boarding the station. Maintain professional conduct at all times." 2 hours passed in a blur of final preparations. Nisha checked every glass, every plate, every piece of silverware made from rare metals. The Crystal Gardens had to be perfect. Other dignitaries from various species had already arrived and taken their seats. There were tall insectoid beings with iridescent shells, floating jellyfish creatures that communicated through color changes, and stocky rock people whose skin resembled granite. Then the moment arrived. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The temperature in the room seemed to rise several degrees. The door opened and Emperor Dracon entered. Nisha forgot to breathe. The Emperor stood nearly 9 feet tall. His scales were the color of midnight with veins of gold running through them like lightning. His eyes glowed with an inner fire, burning amber that seemed to see through everything. Massive wings were folded against his back, and even in his formal robes she could see the powerful muscles beneath his scaled skin. A crown of twisted metal and gemstones rested between 2 elegant horns on his head. But what caught Nisha's attention was the small figure walking beside the Emperor. Prince Zypher was tiny compared to his father, no bigger than a human child of 5 or 6 years. His scales were silver blue like moonlight on water. His small wings were folded tightly against his back, and his golden eyes were wide with fear and confusion. The Imperial guards fanned out around the room. They were almost as imposing as the Emperor himself, each one armed and alert. Director Hammond rushed forward and bowed deeply. "Your Imperial Majesty, welcome to Starlight Nexus. We are honored by your presence." Emperor Dracon acknowledged the greeting with a slight nod. His voice was deep and resonant like distant thunder. This establishment comes highly recommended. We shall dine here after the council session concludes. The Emperor's gaze swept across the restaurant. When his eyes passed over Nisha, she felt as if a spotlight had found her. But the moment passed quickly. He looked down at his son who had pressed himself against his father's leg. Zypher, what do you think of this place? The Emperor's voice softened when addressing his child. The young prince did not answer. Instead, he made a small whimpering sound that broke Nisha's heart. The little dragon was clearly overwhelmed by all the strange smells, sounds, and sights of the space station. The journey has been difficult for him, the Emperor explained to Director Hammond. This is his first time away from our homeworld. Everything here is unfamiliar. Nisha understood that feeling perfectly. She remembered her first days on the station when everything felt wrong and alien. She had cried herself to sleep more than once, longing for the familiar sounds of Earth's forests and the warmth of her family's home. We shall return for the evening meal, Emperor Dracon announced. He turned to leave with his entourage following. Prince Zypher cast one last fearful glance around the room before hurrying after his father. The restaurant erupted in whispered conversations as soon as the imperial party departed. Nisha returned to her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to the scared little prince. She knew what it felt like to be far from home and frightened of everything new. That evening, the crystal gardens filled with the most important beings from dozens of worlds. Ambassadors, military commanders, trade representatives, and nobles all gathered in their finest formal wear. The air hummed with multiple languages and the clinking of crystal glasses. When Emperor Dracon returned, Prince Zypher was still at his side. The young dragon looked even more distressed than before. The long day of diplomatic meetings and formal ceremonies had clearly exhausted him. As his father took his seat at the imperial table, Zypher's composure finally crumbled. The prince began to cry. But this was not the crying of a human child. His wails carried a resonance that made the walls vibrate. The crystal chandeliers above began to sway and tinkle. His small body shook with the force of his distress, and tiny sparks began to escape from his mouth with each sob. The entire restaurant fell silent. All eyes turned to the imperial table. The Emperor's guard stepped forward but seemed uncertain how to help. Even Emperor Dracon himself looked troubled as he tried to comfort his son. Zypher's cries grew louder. The sparks from his mouth became small flames that scorched the tablecloth. Several nearby diners stood and backed away nervously. Everyone knew that young Draken children could be dangerous when upset. Their fire was instinctive and uncontrolled. "Stay back," the Emperor commanded the room. His voice carried authority, but Nisha could hear the worry underneath. "No one move. He is not in control when distressed," but the little prince only cried harder. His flames grew brighter and the temperature in the room began to rise. Plates rattled on tables. Some of the more nervous guests began heading toward the exits. Nisha watched the scene unfold. This powerful emperor who commanded armies and ruled star systems looked helpless before his crying child. Something inside her chest tightened. She thought of Priya, her little sister, and how scared Priya must be going through her treatments. She thought of all the times she had comforted frightened children back home on Earth. Before she fully realized what she was doing, Nisha put down her serving tray and walked toward the imperial table. "Human. Stop immediately," one of the guards growled, but Nisha kept walking. "Human servant," the Emperor's voice boomed. "Do not approach. My son could harm you without intending to." Nisha's heart pounded, but she did not stop. She moved slowly and kept her hands visible. When she was about 10 feet from the table, she knelt down so she was at eye level with the crying prince. "Please, Your Majesty," she said quietly. "I only want to help." The entire restaurant held its breath. Nisha remained kneeling on the polished moonstone floor. Prince Zypher's wails continued to shake the crystal fixtures overhead. Small flames danced around his silver blue scales, and his golden eyes were squeezed shut with misery. The heat radiating from his small body made sweat bead on Nisha's forehead, but she did not move away. Emperor Dracon watched her with an expression she could not read. His guards had their hands on their weapons, but they waited for their emperor's command. Every other being in the restaurant had frozen in place. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving and were peering through the service window. Nisha took a slow breath and spoke softly. "Hello, little one. I know everything feels strange and scary right now. You are so far from home and nothing smells right or sounds right. I understand how that feels. Prince Zypher's crying quieted just slightly. One golden eye opened a crack and focused on her. Nisha could see intelligence there along with the fear and exhaustion. This was not just an animal having a tantrum. This was a frightened child who could not express what he needed. When I first came to this station, Nisha continued in that same gentle voice. I was terrified too. Everything was different from my home on Earth. The food tasted wrong. The air smelled like metal instead of flowers. At night I could not see any familiar stars through my window. I felt so alone. The young prince's other eye opened. His flames flickered but did not go out completely. He was listening to her. Do you know what helped me feel better? Nisha asked. She slowly moved a bit closer, still keeping her movements smooth and predictable. My mother used to sing to me when I was sad. Would you like to hear one of her songs? The restaurant remained utterly silent. Emperor Draken had not given permission, but he had not forbidden it either. He watched Nisha with intense focus. Nisha began to sing. She chose a lullaby her mother had sung to both her and Priya when they were small. It was an old Earth song in Hindi, passed down through generations of her family. The melody was simple and soothing. The words spoke of stars watching over children and moonlight keeping them safe. Her voice was not professionally trained, but it was warm and sincere. The notes carried across the crystal gardens. As she sang, something remarkable happened. Prince Zypher's flames dimmed and then disappeared completely. His crying stopped. He stared at Nisha with wide, wondering eyes. Nisha finished the first verse and began the second. She sang about rivers that flowed to the sea and birds that returned home each evening. She sang about a mother's love that stretched across any distance. The young prince took a tentative step toward her, then another. His small clawed feet clicked softly on the floor. When he was close enough, he reached out one tiny clawed hand and touched Nisha's arm. His scales were warm but not burning hot anymore. Nisha smiled at him and continued singing. She sang the third verse, which was about dreams and hopes and the promise of tomorrow. By the time she finished, Prince Zypher had pressed himself against her side. His small body was trembling but no longer with distress. He was simply exhausted. The silence in the restaurant was profound. Then Emperor Draken spoke. Remarkable. His voice held genuine amazement. In 3 days of travel, no one has been able to calm him. We tried everything our medical staff suggested. Nothing worked. Nisha looked up at the massive emperor. Sometimes children just need to know someone understands them, Your Majesty, and music has a way of speaking when words cannot. The emperor studied her for a long moment. What is your name, human? Nisha Patel, Your Majesty. She performed an awkward bow while still kneeling, careful not to disturb the prince who had practically climbed into her lap. Nisha Patel. Emperor Draken repeated her name as if committing it to memory. You have shown great courage tonight. Most beings would not approach a distressed Draken child. Our fire can kill. Nisha felt the weight of what she had done settling on her shoulders. Her hands began to shake with delayed fear. But when she looked down at Prince Zypher's peaceful face, she knew she would make the same choice again. The evening meal proceeded, but everything had changed. Emperor Draken requested that Nisha remain near his table. She sat on a cushioned chair that one of the guards brought over, with Prince Zypher curled up beside her. The young dragon refused to let go of her hand. Other diners returned to their meals and conversations, but everyone kept glancing at the strange sight of a human girl comforting the imperial heir. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Who was this servant who had dared to disobey the emperor's direct order? How had she known her actions would not result in her death? Finn brought Nisha a plate of food, but she could barely eat. Her mind was spinning with the reality of what had happened. Prince Zypher dozed against her shoulder, occasionally making small rumbling sounds that might have been the Draken version of snoring. Tell me about your world, Emperor Draken said suddenly. He had finished his meal and was watching Nisha with those burning amber eyes. What brings a young human so far from Earth? Nisha swallowed hard. It was terrifying to have the full attention of the most powerful ruler in known space. My younger sister is ill, Your Majesty. She requires expensive medical treatments. I took this position to help my family afford her care. You left your home world for family. The Emperor nodded slowly. That is honorable. Family bonds are sacred to my people as well. He glanced at his sleeping son. Zypher lost his mother 2 years ago. an illness that our medicine could not cure. Since then he has struggled. He does not eat properly. He cannot sleep through the night. Our doctors say he grieves, but we do not know how to help him heal. Nisha's heart ached for both father and son. Grief is difficult for anyone, Your Majesty. But children often do not have the words to express their pain. They need patience and comfort and time. Time is something we have little of. The Emperor's voice was heavy. I have responsibilities across 3 star systems. I cannot spend my days comforting one child no matter how much I wish to do so. Before Nisha could respond, Director Hammond approached the table. He bowed deeply to the Emperor. Your Majesty, the Council is ready to reconvene in the morning. Your quarters have been prepared in the diplomatic wing. Emperor Draken stood. His movement disturbed Prince Zypher, who woke with a start. The young dragon looked around in confusion and then gripped Nisha's hand tighter. Come, Zypher, we must rest, the Emperor said. But when he reached for his son, the prince whimpered and pressed closer to Nisha. The Emperor tried again, and this time Zypher began to cry once more. Small sparks appeared at the corners of his mouth. It seems my son has formed an attachment to you, Nisha Patel. The Emperor's tone was unreadable. Would you be willing to accompany us to our quarters? Perhaps you can help him settle for the night. Nisha looked at Vex, her manager. The Zentarian's 4 eyes were wide with shock, but he nodded quickly. Of course, Your Majesty. Nisha is at your service. And so Nisha found herself walking through the corridors of Starlight Nexus beside Emperor Draken and his guards. Prince Zypher held her hand and walked close to her side. Other beings pressed themselves against the walls as the Imperial party passed. Everyone stared at the human girl who walked beside the Emperor as if she belonged there. The Imperial quarters were larger than Nisha's entire family home back on Earth. The main room had ceilings that soared 30 feet high. The furniture was sized for beings much larger than humans. Tapestries showing scenes from the Draken home world hung on the walls. Through the massive windows, 3 different suns from 3 different star systems were visible in the distance. A team of Draken attendants waited inside. They bowed as the Emperor entered. Their scales ranged from deep green to copper red. All of them looked at Nisha with curiosity and some with suspicion. This is Nisha Patel, Emperor Draken announced. She has my permission to be here. She is to be treated as an honored guest. The attendants bowed again, but Nisha could feel their confusion. She was just a restaurant worker. Why was she in the Imperial quarters? Prince Zypher's sleeping chamber was adjacent to his father's. It was still enormous by human standards, but more appropriately sized for a child. The walls were painted with murals of dragons flying through space. A large sleeping platform was covered in soft materials that resembled silk, but felt warmer. Zypher refused to release Nisha's hand. When she tried to help him onto his sleeping platform, he pulled her up with him. The Emperor watched from the doorway as his son curled against Nisha like she was a favorite toy. Will you sing again? Prince Zypher's voice was small and sweet. It was the first time Nisha had heard him speak. Of course, little one. Nisha stroked his silver-blue scales gently. What would you like to hear? The star song, the one about being safe. So Nisha sang the lullaby again. Then she sang another her mother had taught her, and another. Prince Zypher's eyes grew heavy. His breathing deepened. Within 20 minutes, he was sound asleep. Nisha carefully extracted herself from his grip and climbed down from the sleeping platform. Emperor Draken still stood in the doorway. In the dim light of the sleeping chamber, his scales seemed to glow faintly. He has not slept peacefully in many months, the Emperor said quietly. You have given him something I could not. I'm in your debt, Nisha Patel. I only did what anyone would do, Your Majesty. No. The Emperor's gaze was intense. Most beings would not have dared. You risked your life because you saw a child in pain. That is not common. That is extraordinary. They walked back through the main room. The attendants had retreated to give the Emperor privacy. Nisha suddenly felt very small and out of place in these grand quarters. I must ask something of you, Emperor Draken said. The council meetings will continue for 5 more days. Would you be willing to help care for Zypher during this time? I will compensate you well. Name your price. Nisha thought of Priya and the medical bills. She thought of her family struggling to make ends meet. But she also thought of the scared little dragon who had trusted her. I will help, Your Majesty. Not for payment, but because Prince Zypher needs someone who understands what it means to be far from home and frightened. However, she hesitated, then continued, If you wish to compensate me, any amount would help my sister's medical fund. The Emperor nodded. "It shall be done. Report to these quarters tomorrow morning. My attendants will provide you with anything you need." As Nisha left the imperial quarters and made her way back to her own small cabin, her mind raced with everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, her entire life had changed. She had defied an emperor, comforted a dragon prince, and somehow survived. When she finally lay down on her narrow bunk, she stared at the metal ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Through her small window, she could see the stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere among those countless lights was Earth and her family. She whispered a prayer that Priya was having a good day. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Nisha dreamed of silver dragons and songs that bridged the space between worlds. The next 5 days passed like a dream that felt both wonderful and terrifying. Nisha reported to the imperial quarters each morning after her shift in the restaurant ended. At first, the Draken attendants watched her with suspicion. A human caring for the imperial heir was unprecedented, but they could not argue with results. Prince Zypher thrived under Nisha's care. He began eating his meals again, though Nisha had to coax him by telling stories between each bite. She learned that Draken children ate crystallized minerals along with specially prepared meats from their homeworld. Zypher particularly loved a blue crystal that tasted like cinnamon and starlight, or so he described it. They spent hours in the observation deck attached to the imperial quarters. Nisha would point out different stars and make up stories about them. She told him about Earth and its blue oceans. She described forests where trees grew so tall they seemed to touch the sky. Zypher listened with rapt attention and asked endless questions. What are trees made of? Do they breathe fire? Can they fly? Nisha laughed and explained that trees were very different from dragons. She used her data pad to show him pictures of Earth's forests, its mountains, and its cities. Zypher was fascinated by everything. Your world is so green, he said with wonder. Our home world has red sand and purple skies. The trees there are made of crystal and they sing when the wind blows through them. That sounds beautiful, Nisha said honestly. I would love to see it someday. Maybe you will. Zypher looked up at her with his golden eyes. Maybe Father will bring you to visit us. The thought seemed impossible, but Nisha smiled anyway. Maybe he will, little one. Emperor Drakon would return from his council meetings each evening exhausted and tense. The diplomatic negotiations were not going well. There were disputes about trade routes and territory. Some of the other species present at the conference resented the Draken Empire's power and influence. But when the Emperor entered his quarters and saw his son laughing and playing with Nisha, his stern expression would soften. He began joining them for the evening meal. At first he mostly listened as Nisha and Zypher talked, but gradually he started contributing to the conversations. Nisha discovered that Emperor Drakon had a dry sense of humor and a deep love for history. He told stories about the ancient Draken warriors who had first learned to survive in space. He spoke of his own father who had united the 3 star systems under one peaceful rule. One evening, after Zypher had fallen asleep, the Emperor asked Nisha to stay. They sat in the main room drinking a warm beverage that tasted like honey and smoke. Through the windows, the stars glittered in their eternal dance. You have a gift with children, the Emperor said. Have you considered becoming a teacher or caretaker professionally? Nisha shook her head. I never thought I was particularly good with children. I just remembered what my mother did for me and tried to do the same for Zypher. Sometimes the best wisdom is the simplest. Emperor Draken gazed out at the stars. I have access to the greatest scholars and experts in the galaxy. They gave me detailed plans for helping Zypher recover from his grief. Charts and schedules and therapeutic techniques. None of it worked. But you, with nothing but kindness and song, reached him immediately. Nisha felt her cheeks warm. I think maybe he just needed to feel understood, Your Majesty. Sometimes when we are in pain, we do not need solutions. We just need someone to sit with us in the darkness until we are ready to find the light again. The Emperor looked at her with an expression of deep respect. You are wise beyond your years, Nisha Patel. Their peaceful routine was shattered on the 5th day. Nisha arrived at the imperial quarters that morning to find the attendants in a state of panic. Emperor Drakon was in an emergency council session. Something had gone wrong during the night. Quilara, the crystalline being from the restaurant, had been assigned to help Nisha during her time with Prince Zypher. She rushed over with news. There has been an attack. Not here on the station, but on a Draken supply convoy near the border of the Empire. Ships were destroyed. Many lives were lost. Nisha felt cold dread in her stomach. Who attacked them? A coalition of species who opposed the Emperor's rule. They call themselves the Free Systems Alliance. They claim the Draken Empire has too much power and must be challenged. Quilara's crystalline body pulsed with anxious colors. There is talk of war. Prince Zypher sensed the tension immediately. He stayed close to Nisha all day and flinched at every loud sound. By evening he was crying again, though not as severely as that first night. Nisha held him and sang softly, but her own heart was heavy with worry. When Emperor Draken finally returned, he looked like he had aged 10 years. His scales seemed duller and his eyes burned with barely controlled fury. The council meeting had been a disaster. The species involved in the attack refused to accept responsibility. They claimed it was the action of rogue elements they could not control. But everyone knew it was a lie. This was a deliberate provocation. They wanted to draw the Draken Empire into a conflict. Father Zypher ran to his father despite his fear. The Emperor scooped up his son and held him close. For a moment the mask of imperial authority slipped and Nisha saw only a tired father holding his child. "I am here, little flame." The Emperor's voice was gentle. All is well, but all was not well. Over the next 2 days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. More attacks occurred. Draken outposts were raided. Merchant ships were seized. The Free Systems Alliance was growing bolder. The Council of Species dissolved in chaos. Accusations flew back and forth. Some species supported the Draken Empire, while others secretly or openly sided with the Alliance. Starlight Nexus, meant to be neutral ground for peace, became a powder keg ready to explode. Emperor Drakon spent all his time in war councils now. Nisha barely saw him. She kept Prince Zypher distracted with games and stories, but the young dragon was not fooled. He knew something terrible was happening. On the 7th day, disaster struck. Nisha was in the observation deck with Zypher when alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors. All personnel to emergency stations. Director Hammond's voice was tight with fear. "We are under attack. This is not a drill." Through the transparent walls of the observation deck, Nisha saw ships approaching the station. They bore no identification markings. Their weapons were charging. The Free Systems Alliance had brought the fight to Starlight Nexus itself. Nisha grabbed Zypher and ran for the interior of the Imperial quarters. The Draken guards were already moving, establishing defensive positions. One of them, a female warrior with emerald green scales, shouted at Nisha, "Get the prince to the safe room. Now." But before Nisha could move, an explosion rocked the entire station. The floor tilted violently. Nisha fell, instinctively curling her body around Zypher to protect him. Debris rained down from the ceiling. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency lighting that cast everything in an eerie red glow. Zypher was screaming. Nisha tried to calm him, but her own fear was overwhelming. She could hear more explosions in the distance. The station's defensive weapons were firing back at the attackers. The safe room was on the other side of the quarters. Nisha had to cross the main chamber to reach it. She picked up Zypher, who was surprisingly light despite his scales, and ran. She was halfway across when another explosion blew out one of the massive windows. The emergency force fields activated immediately, preventing decompression, but the blast threw Nisha off her feet. She hit the ground hard, her head cracking against the floor. Pain exploded behind her eyes and the world spun. Through her blurred vision, she saw figures entering through the damaged window. They wore armored suits and carried weapons. These were not Draken guards. These were invaders. "The prince," one of them shouted. "Grab the prince." Nisha's body moved before her mind caught up. She pushed herself up despite the pain and positioned herself between the invaders and Zypher. The young dragon was trying to breathe fire, but only small sparks came out. He was too young and too frightened to defend himself properly. "Stay back," Nisha shouted. Her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. The lead invader, a tall being with gray skin and 4 arms, laughed. "Move aside, human. This is not your concern. We have no quarrel with your species. He is a child," Nisha said. She could feel blood running down the side of her face from where she had hit her head. "Whatever your quarrel with the Emperor, leave his son out of it. The Emperor must learn there are consequences for his tyranny." The invader raised his weapon. "Now move or die with the dragon whelp." Nisha spread her arms wide, making herself as large a barrier as possible. She was shaking with fear, but she did not move. The invader's finger tightened on the trigger. Then the wall exploded inward. Emperor Dracon burst through in his true form. He had shed his humanoid shape and appeared as a full dragon. He was massive. His wings spread wide, his scales gleaming like polished obsidian. Fire burned in his throat, visible through his slightly opened jaws. The invaders scattered, but they were not fast enough. The Emperor's fire consumed 3 of them in an instant. The others tried to fight back, but their weapons were useless against his armored scales. Within seconds, all the invaders were either dead or had retreated. The Emperor shifted back to his humanoid form and rushed to where Nisha knelt, protecting his son. Zypher broke free from Nisha's arms and flew into his father's embrace. "Father!" I was so scared. But Nisha protected me. She would not let them take me. Emperor Dracon looked at Nisha. Blood covered half her face and she was swaying with pain and shock. "You stood against armed invaders for my son. You would have died for him." Nisha tried to answer, but her vision was going dark. She heard the Emperor calling for medical help. She felt strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. Then there was nothing but peaceful darkness. When she woke, Nisha was in a medical facility. The walls were white and clean. Soft beeping sounds came from monitoring equipment beside her bed. Her head no longer hurt, though she felt foggy and confused. A face appeared above her. It was Finn from the restaurant. His red hair was disheveled and he looked like he had not slept in days. "Nisha, thank goodness. We were so worried. What happened?" Nisha's voice was scratchy. "Is Zypher safe?" "The prince is fine, thanks to you." Finn helped her sit up carefully. "The attack was repelled. The Alliance ships were destroyed or driven off. But Nisha, you have been unconscious for 2 days. You had a serious head injury." Nisha touched her head gingerly. It was wrapped in bandages. 2 days? I need to check on Zypher." He must be terrified. The door to her room opened and Emperor Dracon entered. He looked tired but relieved to see her awake. His usual guards were with him, and behind them came Prince Zypher. The young dragon broke free and flew to Nisha's bedside. "You are awake." Zypher's eyes shone with tears of joy. "Father said you would be okay, but I was so worried." He climbed onto the bed carefully, mindful of the medical equipment. "You saved me. You were so brave." Nisha hugged him, feeling tears in her own eyes. "I could not let anything happen to you, little one." Emperor Dracon approached the bed. His expression was solemn. "Nisha Patel, you have proven yourself to be a being of extraordinary courage and honor. You stood against my enemies with nothing but your own body as a shield. You were willing to sacrifice your life for my son. I only did what was right, Your Majesty. What is right and what is easy are seldom the same thing. You chose the difficult path." The Emperor knelt beside her bed so that their eyes were level. "This is not how I had hoped to ask this, but circumstances require swift action. The attacks on my empire are escalating. I must return home with my forces and prepare our defenses." Nisha felt her heart sink. "Of course, Your Majesty. I understand, but I cannot leave Zypher in a war zone." The Emperor continued. "Nor can I subject him to more violence and fear. He has already lost his mother. I will not risk losing him as well." "What are you saying?" Nisha asked. "I am saying that I wish to hire you as Zypher's personal caretaker. You would come to our home world and live in the imperial palace. You would be responsible for his education and well-being. In return, you and your family would want for nothing. Your sister's medical expenses would be completely covered. Your parents would be provided with a generous pension, and you would have access to resources most humans can only dream of." Nisha stared at him in shock. "You want me to come live on the Draken homeworld, to raise your son? I want my son to have someone who loves him as you do, someone who sees him as a child first and a prince second." Emperor Dracon's voice was sincere. "I cannot give him what you have given him. I have duties and responsibilities that keep me away. But you can be what he needs." Nisha looked at Zypher, who was watching her with hopeful golden eyes. She thought about her family on Earth. She thought about leaving behind everything familiar once again. But she also thought about the scared little dragon who had trusted her, the child who called her when he had nightmares, the prince who laughed at her silly stories and cried when she sang sad songs. "Yes," Nisha said finally. "I will come with you. I will take care of him." Zypher threw his arms around her neck with a joyful cry. "Father, did you hear? Nisha is coming home with us." "I heard, little flame." The Emperor's voice was warm with relief. He looked at Nisha. You have my eternal gratitude, and I promise you will be treated as family, not as a servant." The next week was a whirlwind of preparations. Nisha said goodbye to her co-workers at the Crystal Gardens. Quellara cried crystal in tears. Finn gave her a tight hug and made her promise to stay in touch. Vex, the manager, grumbled that he would never find another server as dedicated as her. Director Hammond personally thanked her for her bravery during the attack. The station had suffered damage, but no one had been killed, thanks to the quick response of the Draken Guards and the station's own security forces. Nisha packed her few belongings and sent a long message to her family on Earth. She explained everything that had happened, knowing they would barely believe it. She told Priya that her medical bills would all be paid and that she should focus on getting better. When the day came to board the Imperial flagship, Nisha stood in the docking bay with Zypher's hand in hers. The massive dragon-shaped vessel waited for them. Emperor Drakon stood at the entrance with his guards arrayed behind him. "Are you ready, Nisha Patel?" he asked. Nisha looked down at Zypher, who smiled up at her. She thought about the journey ahead to a world she had never imagined visiting. She thought about the responsibility of raising an imperial heir. She thought about how much her life had changed since that first night when she had heard a child crying and decided to help. "I am ready, Your Majesty." They boarded the ship together. As it pulled away from Starlight Nexus and jumped to faster-than-light travel, Nisha looked back at the station one last time. Then she turned forward toward the unknown future that awaited among the stars. Prince Zypher tugged on her sleeve. "Will you sing the star song later, before I go to sleep?" "Of course, little one," Nisha smiled. "Always." And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, harmony had been found between two very different species. A dragon prince and a human girl had formed a bond that would change the future of an empire. All because one person had chosen courage over fear and compassion over safety. The stars whispered their approval as the ship carried them home.